Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has made some questionable moves recently. Now, it's understandable that he is under a lot of pressure, a lot of stress. His country has been invaded by Russia. There are entire major cities that have been leveled as a result of the brutality of Putin's war against Ukraine. However, now you have Zelensky taking control of the media, while also doing away with opposition parties that are far more sympathetic to Russia. Now, some might say that's understandable, they're in the middle of war, this is martial law, but I disagree. I think strategically this is a bad move, and honestly, optically, it's a bad move as well. Let me explain. First, the details. The new platform named United News is a national security measure given the direct military aggression of the Russian Federation, the active dissemination of misinformation by the aggressor state, and distortion of information, as well as justifying or denying the armed aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine, Zelensky's office said in a statement. Essentially, Zelensky has decided to merge all national television stations into a single platform, and he says that this is just his effort to combat disinformation. Now, I don't know if you guys agree with me on this, but so far I think that Ukraine has done a pretty good job in the propaganda war. Okay, I think, and it's not just because Ukraine is savvier than Russia when it comes to propaganda. We all see the videos, we all see the brutality, we all see what Russia is doing through its illegal invasion of Ukraine. So the people of Ukraine have put up a fierce resistance to Russia. So, I mean, look, I would be against this no matter what, but maybe he would have a legitimate argument if the disinformation was so persuasive that you now have Ukrainians fighting one another rather than resisting the Russian invasion, but that's not what's happening here. According to the release, United News will mainly consist of information and/or information-analytical programs on a single information platform of strategic communication and will be a round-the-clock information marathon. There's gonna be a lot of information, guys, okay? But only one kind of information. The announcement, which came under martial law, means the suspension of privately owned and operated media outlets in Ukraine. And Zelensky, unfortunately, has decided to take things even further. On Sunday, he announced in a speech that the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine has decided to block 11 various political parties. So here's the statement by the president. The National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine decided, given the full-scale war waged by the Russian Federation and the ties of some political structures with the state, any activity of a number of political parties during the martial law is suspended, namely Opposition Platform for Life, Sherry Party, Nashi Opposition Bloc, Left Opposition, Union of Left Forces, State Progressive Socialist Party of Ukraine, Socialist Party of Ukraine, Socialist Party, Vladimir Saldo Bloc. So those are the parties that would be impacted by this. And if you're curious what the reasoning is, he says the Ministry of Justice is instructed to immediately take comprehensive measures to ban the activities of these political parties in the prescribed manner. Everyone must now take care of the interests of our state, the interests of Ukraine. Now, the parties that he listed tend to be far more sympathetic to Vladimir Putin and Russia, but most of them have no power, right? They're tiny parties, they have no power, with one exception. So most of the parties affected were small, but one of them, the Opposition Platform for Life, has 44 seats in the 450-seat Ukrainian parliament. The Opposition Platform for Life is led by Viktor Medvedchuk, a pro-Moscow oligarch with close ties to the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Party officials later said the suspension had no legal basis. Listen, if you're gonna claim that you're a democracy, and that's what we keep hearing over and over, this is a pro-democracy country, pro-democracy. You can't ban a political party that has 44 seats in parliament. I mean, I just think it's a bad move and it provides fodder for the Russians. I mean, one of the claims that they keep making is that ethnic Russians are treated terribly in Ukraine. And that's part of the reason why they needed to do this invasion. don't give them any evidence or fodder for that. I think it's a really bad move, and I actually do want to also discuss, how similar Zelensky's actions are, in my opinion, to some of the moves that Vladimir Putin made in Russia years ago. Now, I want to show you two different videos. The first one has to do with Vladimir Putin coming into power as president, and one of the first things he did once he had power. Let's watch.
Putin moved to consolidate power. One of his first targets, television.
One of the first things he did was to take control of television, because more than 90% of Russians got all their news from television.
During the Yeltsin years, independent television channels like NTV flourished, even as they ridiculed political figures.
NTV has a comic show called Kukly, Puppets, and when Putin comes to rise in public life, it features a Putin puppet as well, and he's never portrayed very flatteringly. Putin apparently was driven to madness by this show, and by the way he was portrayed on it, the way he was mocked on it.
NTV and its owner, Vladimir Zelensky, came into the crosshairs of Putin's government.
He sent armed operatives from the Prosecutor General Service and the tax police to raid the offices of Media Most, the parent company of NTV.
So Putin comes into power as president and just starts shutting down any type of media he dislikes. Any kind of media that it might be satirical, it might poke fun at him, shuts it down. Anything that might oppose Putin's policies, shuts it down. Now, some might argue in defense of Zelensky, well, this comparison is apples and oranges, because with Vladimir Putin, we're talking about an authoritarian who just used his position of power to continue consolidating power. There was no crisis, there is no martial law, which, okay, that's a fair argument, fair. But what about what Vladimir Putin did when there was a terrorist attack in Russia, well, in an autonomous zone that the Chechens wanted to avoid making part of Russia, right? So this is known as the Beslan terror attack. This was in September of 2004. Awful, awful hostage situation where a school was held hostage for several days by Chechen terrorists. And Vladimir Putin refused to capitulate. Instead, he sent in his own troops, and that led to just a complete and utter nightmare. But while that story itself is bad enough, what Putin did in exploiting that tragedy to consolidate power is the point that I'm trying to make here. So let's watch.
Putin's troops were armed with rockets, grenade launchers, and flamethrowers.
A lot of the children who burned alive because of a fire that raged.
It turns into this debacle, and the end result is corpses of little children stacked like firewood.
More than 320 people were killed, half of them children, in the tragedy in the town of Beslan in north of
Putin seized on the tragedy to expand his power and control.
He's demanded a radical shake-up of security and greater powers.
Russia has suffered.
He canceled elections throughout the country.
Stark message. Governors and leaders of Russia's
And
dozens
new
of
rules
republics
forced out the most outspoken members of the parliament.
Forced out the most outspoken leaders of the parliament. It sounds strikingly similar to what Zelensky is doing now by pushing out 44 parliament members who happen to be part of an opposition party that is sympathetic to Russia. I understand where Zelensky is coming from. He's under attack, his people are under attack, civilians are dying, there is a refugee crisis as a result. However, what he's doing does not solve anything. Right, consolidating power, shutting down opposition groups, shutting down any type of independent media. It's not right, he shouldn't do it. And honestly, when it comes to propaganda, again, I would argue that the Ukrainians are winning. There's really no need to do this. This further complicates the peace talks. Putin is way less likely, way less likely to strike a deal with Zelensky if he's seen as consolidating power. Zelensky's move does provide fodder for Russians who claim that ethnic Russians are being treated poorly in Ukraine, and that's why they need to invade and save the day. And it's just, again, unnecessary to do the censorship, especially considering how Ukrainians are clearly winning the propaganda war here. Everyone sees what Russia is doing. Everyone sees the brutality that's being carried out. Everyone sees how much the civilians are suffering. The opponents within Ukraine right now clearly are not powerful or persuasive enough to convince the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian military to just give up and stop resisting. They're resisting fiercely. And again, I just don't think that this was the right move for Zelensky. It was completely unnecessary. By the way, going back to that school hostage crisis, I want to give you updated numbers. 333 people died, including 186 children, all because Putin refused to capitulate. He refused to engage in any kind of negotiation. And that's terrifying because it shows you that he doesn't give a damn about anyone's life. He doesn't care about the lives of Russian troops. He doesn't care about Ukrainian civilians, including children. I mean, we've seen that with the brutality that he's carried out. And so if there's anything that should be top of mind, it should be, what can we do? What can Zelensky do? What can the West do to support the peace negotiations? Don't take steps backwards by further provoking a man, Putin, who clearly doesn't care about human lives at all and is willing to see everyone go down in flames just to prove a point.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR, so those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.